Hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming despite the rainy Monday. It's really impressive to get this big room together in such a shady weather. So today is a very special occasion. I'm really glad to announce our special guest today, is Heuer, who is here thanks to the wonder of the internet because he found us as one of the emerging spots in the entrepreneurial scene here in Budapest, and we decided to do an event together. So he's here with us to share his lessons learned. He's been a serial entrepreneur for more than 22 years, and he's gonna tell you the experiences and insights that he gathered along his journey. So without further ado, please give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. It's really a pleasure to be here. My wife and I decided to go on holiday and chose Budapest to come and have a visit, and we've been very fortunate to travel around the world. It's our first time in this part of the world, and I basically found this, which is what I've been finding around the world for the last 10 years. A community of people trying to make a difference, trying to better their lives, and trying to actually make themselves grow as well. And I'm going to share a bit of my lessons from failure, as well as a few lessons from success. But I think it's important that we start with an understanding that failure is okay. In fact, one of the biggest things in the corporate world right now is innovation, right? We've got innovation officers, we've got innovation camps, we've got all this innovation work going on. Yet, corporations don't know how to innovate. That's why they buy companies instead of actually build great products inside. What they failed to realize, and I've learned this from my time at Deloitte, where I helped to lead the social business effort there a few years ago, is that innovation is iteration. It is a constant process of failure. And in fact, all of my failures have been failures up, except for the financial side, but that's a different story. And still, I'm here on vacation, on holiday, and it's a wonderful life. So it doesn't have to be so difficult. I thought this was a very poignant opening slide because we never really get to see out the window to see what's ahead of us. We sometimes have to take our best guess. We have to clean off our glasses and try to look again, and it just gets muddy over and over and over. The road in front of us is bumpy, but if we have a destination in our hearts, we will find our way there, and we will do whatever it takes to clean that window so we can see as clearly as possible to get ahead. I actually, at 5 years old, had a really interesting experience. I learned about business on television. That was about 1974. Yes, it's going to be my 47th birthday in 2 days. And I just said, oh, that's really neat. And I said, one day, I'm going to own a bunch of companies. And I wrote my own little logo, which was HHC, for Heuer Holding Company. And I just saw that one day I'd be a business person and have all these companies. Now, my mother had cerebral palsy, which is a muscular impairment. And I grew up with my mom and my grandparents. We lived on what in the US is called Social Security and my grandfather's pension. We weren't poor, but we weren't well off. And my family wasn't from business. But I just had that notion in my mind, and I set off to school. And I was very fortunate to get some good schooling, to have a loving family, and to be given the opportunities to do something. The most important thing that started for me early was my mom's belief in me. My mom believed I could do anything because I was her miracle. And that family bond and what she did to instill in me a belief that I could do anything I wanted is really where it all started. And that's the most important place where I believe you all need to come from, is that belief in self, and to surround yourself with a family, with a community like the one here at Mosaik, that can inspire you and support you and believe in you to help you get through all the obstacles and all the bumpy roads that lie ahead. As I moved on in life, when I was 23 years old, I went to work with my friend's father. He had a business that sold other business opportunities. He helped entrepreneurs set up businesses by advertising in Entrepreneur Magazine and Small Business Opportunity Magazine. So at 23 years old, I was teaching men older than me today how to run a business, having never run a business. It was basically something that I discovered with common sense was largely missing in most businessmen. That they looked at it from a numbers perspective or from whatever it is that they learned, and they totally lacked common sense of what we should do. Instead, trying to always follow the recipe for what the book said to do, or to listen to best practices. And they would do the same thing that the best practices that Mondelez or Monsanto wrote in an article, instead of learning to adapt what those lessons were to your own experience. So I bring that here to remind you that my experience and my insights, they're not the template to follow, but they're a guide to learn from that you have to apply to your own situation as you go. This was a very difficult time for me. I ended up getting very sick because I actually cared about my customers when the owner of the company at the time really didn't. He cared about the money. And I really wanted to help people while he wanted to cash checks. And I just got sick, and eventually I got an ulcer, and at 24 years old, I moved home from where I was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, just south of New York, and it was very difficult. Spent a little bit of time down there before I started my first company, and we'll get to that in a moment, but on the bigger picture, I've almost always been wrong, which is really tough for a little smart, arrogant kid who thinks he's really right. And my wife can tell you how difficult that is, because I'm wrong, as she will tell you very often. But the thing is, it's really been at the wrong time. I now call myself a futurist. I didn't know how to really reference that before. I'm actually officially an IBM futurist in both their marketing and collaboration programs, helping them to define and identify the future for small businesses and large businesses. And of course, I've been a serial entrepreneur because I don't only see that future before it even exists, but the language doesn't even exist to explain what it is I see. It's like I don't mean to compare myself to Picasso, but it's that sort of problem. I see this crazy map in my head of things fitting together, and there's no words to describe it. And some of you may have had this experience as well. And so we get out and we try to explain it. No, it's like this. No, it's like this. No, it's like this. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned, because I see it so clearly, and the people I'm speaking with don't. And I just struggle so hard to be able to be understood, to be seen for what it is that I see. And it's really very, very difficult. And actually, the first lesson from failure is to continue to try. And in fact, this last time with my last company, and we'll get to it more at the end, before I even went out to raise money, I spent 6 months working on the story. Before I even built the code, I spent 6 months working on the story. Because what I've seen too many times from inside Silicon Valley, where I've now lived for the past 16 years, is that engineers will build a great product, but they have no idea how real people will use it. So then they go off and they hire a PR firm, and they hire some designers, and they hire marketing people to help sell it. But they can't even explain to the marketing people what it does or why anyone will benefit. So by the idea of finding the story first, by finding the value, by finding the purpose at the heart of the business, we can save a lot of headache because that idea is built into the product. It's already starting with the customer's problem and the value we provide from the very, very beginning. So I'm going to go through a number of the startups that I've founded over the years and share some stories and lessons from each of them with you. And then we're going to end up with a couple of closing thoughts that are very hopeful, I hope, hopefully inspirational in some sense. And then hopefully we can talk and I'll answer questions and I'll be around for a while afterwards as well so that we can maybe help you with your specific problem and see what we can do to help you get ahead and find greater success with what you're working on. So it was 1994 when I moved to Miami again, and I started my first business. It was an online community that we were looking at a broad network across the country. We had the very nice domain name vcn.net, .net. We couldn't even get the .com back then, and they were always taken, right? All the good names are taken. But we had VCN.net, and we thought we were like a television network, but for the web, focused on local stations and local content. City Search, Sidewalk, there's so many different places out there, but the idea was a city guide, along with a webzine, along with a business directory, and because it was Sobe.com as our first location for South Beach, we had this international allure of everyone coming to us and being interested, all the tourists, all the locals, and I ended up building all the websites for all the major hotels, nightclubs, the city government, the Chamber of Commerce, economic development. We actually briefly were working with the Miami Dolphins from the National Football League. We did the magazines, we did media, we did everyone. We were the big web developer down there. And the reason why we were doing all this web design is because the content we were producing, this existed before there was a banner ad. So we actually started this business like, how are we going to make money when there's no real advertising? We said, okay, well, people need websites to advertise. So that's what we'll start. So VCN is not a lesson necessarily in the dynamics of the market and evolving, except for one very important thing. I, again, applied my common sense and said, I want to figure out how I can make money in one city, and then once we get that, we'll scale it and move it to other cities around the world. And we'll be smart about how we spend our money. We're not going to waste money and all that. And at the time, people were buying $50,000 desks. And they were blowing through a lot of money. And in fact, I ended up selling this business to my partners, two of my partners in it, who went on to raise 64 million US and ended up on fuckedcompany.com because they had, I think it was 4 floors of real estate, and they only occupied about half of one. So they just kept spending and spending and spending. And honestly, that was one of my first lessons because I didn't read the market. I didn't know that's what people wanted. The people with the money wanted the largesse. They didn't want you to be practical and smart. They wanted you to grow as fast as you can. I still disagree with that. I still won't do that. I still won't just set money on fire for no reason. But what I found then was to read how is it that the people who are investing want you to behave. What is it that they're looking for from you? This doesn't mean betray yourself. This means to understand what the buyer wants and actually bring the same customer centricity to your discussions with your investors. What I also learned from this, as I kind of hinted, is that I ended up selling the business to 2 of my partners because we weren't getting along. In fact, it was even more complicated than that, and I can't talk about some of those things because of documents that I've signed and everything around it. But I'll tell you where it went wrong. It went wrong at the beginning. I didn't have a mentor. I had no business person to teach me how to do this stuff. I had no family to turn to teach me. And I've since learned from some very, very wise people that mentors are the greatest shortcut to success. Mentors are the greatest shortcut to success because they're going to guide you in a friendly way that is supportive to help you make better decisions to learn from their experiences. So I started this company. It was just like, yeah, let's just start a company. Why not? I'll figure it out. And what I ended up doing was I split up all the stock. I didn't even know about options. I mean, I was 24 years old. The startup culture we have today is completely different. It was the very beginning of that at the time. So there was no articles about stock options. There was no websites about how to start a company and split it up properly. So I literally divvied up the stock to everyone. So I now owned 17.6% of the company I started, and I had no control over it. So every time we got into a meeting, it was an argument, it was a fight. I had to build alliances, and it became very political. And one of the most important lessons I learned is to keep control of the idea and of the operations through the ownership of the stock and through other mechanisms in it. And every country's a little different, so I'll just leave it at that because I don't know the nature of your corporate entities here versus what we have with laws in the US. But if you really believe in the idea and it's your idea, you have the right to be able to help shape and control the decision making. And you really need to hold on to that as long as you possibly can. What else did I learn? Oh gosh, I learned that you can stay up for 4 days in a row to launch a website. That was a very good lesson for me, if you really believe in it. I learned that you had to really fight big companies to get paid on time, particularly when they were stealing from another budget to pay you and they didn't want to have to steal that or tell anyone they were doing it. And I also learned some really important elements of community dynamics, that ultimately everything really is local. We can have WeWork all over the world, and that's great, and they're cookie cuttering it, and they're making it nice, but to have something that's homegrown like Mosaik here, of people from Budapest who are helping to grow it, there's nothing like this. It's a very important component to making that success together as a family. You have shared interests, shared purpose, and a shared heritage that's very special, and that makes it unique. And you just call on that as much as you can. So from Virtual Community Network, one of my business partners and a university fraternity brother of mine started working on modelnetwork.com. We also built Style Network, Production Network, Casting Network. Oh, I don't even remember all the other networks. But the whole idea was we had a lot of models hanging out in South Beach, and we hung out with a lot of them and went to the parties at night at all the clubs until the next day, until the next morning. In fact, sometimes we would roll in at 9 a.m. into the office after being all night clubbing and watching the sunrise party on the beach. And then we'd send everyone off to work, and then we'd go back to sleep and come back at 5 o'clock, see if they did their work. And then we'd do some work for about 7-8 hours, and then we'd go out again all night. So it was a very fun time. My liver is paying for it now, so what I've also learned is don't drink too much. It's really, really important. Water is your friend. In fact, hold on a second. Let me do this that way. Remember. Okay, very good. What I also learned, and my friend, my business partner, Rick, who owns the business, fully and runs it still today. It's still active today. He's a true brother. It's not just this fraternity university thing. After Hurricane Andrew destroyed Miami, and it also took out a big chunk of my house where my family was living while I was away, he drove down and took water and supplies and propane and food, and he just took an entire pickup truck full to take care of my family. And we're still very close today, and we talk every month and all that. But I never got any paperwork. I was supposed to have 5 to 10% of the company. Didn't get the paperwork. I still supposedly have 5 to 10% of the company. But if it ever sells or anything, I'm gonna probably get nothing. And that's okay for me as I'm looking at this, because he's worked his ass off for 17, 18 years to make it happen. And all I did was some very little stuff in the beginning to help him do it. I wish I had the paperwork, but I don't, and it's okay. But another very important lesson, whenever you can, get the paperwork written and get it up front. The other thing from both of these stories that I learned is actually to make a plan for business failure. What happens when it doesn't work? How are you and I, as co-founders, going to break up? Who's going to take what? What are the terms? How are we going to talk about it? And actually go through the exercise of planning for, it didn't work, we're not getting along, we need to separate. And it's a very difficult conversation to have, but I've done it in every one of my companies since. And as Christy can attest to, and actually as Bill and Ron can attest to, hi guys, I did that with my last company particularly well. And both of the other people I had brought in to found the business with me, we separated a year in, and we're still very close. They have their stock. I was still pushing on it. I'm still pushing on it today, which we'll talk about more in a minute. But we had it planned in advance, and it was much less painful. And it actually ended up giving us a chance at success that I never would have had if we didn't have that conversation up front. So in 2000, I couldn't find my logo because it's been a while. But this was a press release that went out on June 29th, 2000. The press release went out after we launched, of course, because we wanted to get it online and make sure it worked and everything first. And the idea was information appliances. I had the prediction that one day, and this is 2000, I had the prediction one day that we would have one of these in everyone's pocket, walking around the world, taking photos, shooting 360 videos, messaging and communicating everywhere. And not only that, but we would have smart homes, we'd have web browsers in our refrigerators, we'd have digital media, and so we built this company called Info Apps. And it wasn't for apps as we think of it today, it was for information appliances. The idea that these smart devices would be in our hands. So, right again, way too early on that one. That one was about 7-8 years early, so great, I did it again. And what I actually learned from it was a couple of really interesting things. And that was to actually, before I tell you that story, let me back up. Because if you remember around that time, actually around April, May of 2000, that was the dot-com bust. That was when the valuation started plummeting, companies started selling off. So I basically took $250,000. My grandfather gave me my inheritance early. I saved $100,000 from the prior companies, and I took all $250,000 US and I put it into doing info apps and building it. And then the market crashed. So I literally woke up one morning in a scene of a war with grenades going off around me running forward with a gun, hitting the ground and like going nuts, like what's going on? And I woke up in a sweat. I'm like, I've got to change it. I've got to change the business. I've got to pivot. I've got to figure out how are we going to pivot. And then I came to this, conversing. What I recognized was that the method that I was going to use for helping people discover which of these smartphones and devices were good for them was actually applicable to others. So I went from what was, we would say, a B2C model, a business to consumer model, to a business to business model, and I started working on conversational intelligence, hence conversal. And so I got the basics of the plan together, and this time I said, okay, I waited too long to raise money before, I'm gonna go out and raise money right away on the plan. So I took the plan, I was in Washington, D.C., and I took the plan around and I started showing it and giving the pictures and fixing the pictures every week. And that's actually another important thing, I'll hold on for a second. A lot of people are going to tell you different things about how to change your pitch. In fact, everybody will tell you their way that is the best way for you to fix your pitch. Don't listen to them all. You can't, because all you will do is update your deck every day with the little word choice they have and everything else. You have to find a way to tell them very simply, thank you very much, let me make note of that. And then go back and consider what the advice is before making the change. You don't want to just act on it and update your pitch deck just because one person told you. You want to be able to share that insight, run that by other people, and just like everything else, A/B test it. Because it's just hypothesis until we test and process and actually find out what the data tells us about which way to go. So I'm out pitching Conversal and saying, look, it's going to be a really big thing. We can mine all these AOL chat rooms. We can actually look at CompuServe and find out what people are saying and how they feel about brands and what it is that they're using the products for. That's going to be awesome. One day we can actually just enter a search word and go, wow, look at all these people who love what we're doing. So a little ahead of its time again, as the case might be. But as it is, one of the people that I pitched it to, a friend of mine, brought me into his accelerator. And about a year later, after I had given up on the idea because I couldn't get funding, they took my business plan and executed on it. So they just said, oh, that was a good idea, Chris. They didn't tell me, of course. I found out later. They later sold that company for $4 billion US, which they pocketed about 2.5 of between the three founders who were sitting in the meeting with that accelerator and I, when they had built a spider and I had asked them, like, let's partner, let's build this together. It's not a tale of caution for not sharing your story as much as it is like that. But it is a tale of being cautious of who you are meeting and who you can trust and what their reputations are to do your research in advance. It's not so much that they were terrible people per se. They had investors, they had to do what they had to do to make it. Their business failed and they took up the great idea that they found and never communicated. I wrote about it once. A bunch of people saw it, it blew up for a few minutes and then it went away. And of course I never got a takedown order because it was all true. And I'd be in a slightly different place if I had gotten that money, but I'm still here. And I'm still able to continue to invent and find new ways of getting forward. And as much as it hurt back then to see that happen, and as much more as I could have done with all that money, I've been very fortunate to have a blessed life, which is a very important lesson to learn, to be wherever you are, because you can't change that past. Whatever happened with that has happened. The only thing I can do differently is what I'm doing next. So how do I take that, choose what it means, and make something positive out of it for myself, instead of dwelling on it and getting stuck in the negative thought and being miserable about it and doing nothing. We'll come back to that again, because apparently I am very thick-headed, and it takes a lot of times to learn sometimes, to put your hand on the stove and learn that it's hot. And eventually we do learn, as I'll explain in a little bit. But it was quite painful at the time, but now I can choose the meaning that this is what led me to where I'm at today, and I'm better for it. Insights I didn't even build a logo for. I'm like, let's go out and raise money on this, because it was 2004. 2004, and what was happening at that time was that everyone was adding comments to their websites. Even like brands were finally starting to add comments to their websites. And I'm like, finally, we're going to have an open dialogue. This was a couple of years after the Clue Train manifesto had come out, and I really have gotten, who's read Clue Train? Has anyone? Oh, you all have to read this. Great, so I get to share one book with you. It's cluetrain.com, Clue, C-L-U-E-T-R-A-I-N. And it's free online, or you can buy the book for a little bit more. But it was this idea of markets as conversations. And what we found in the comments, and we still see this today, is if an article is very popular, there's 400 comments. So where is the one that's actually important to you? Where is the one from your professor who you think is an expert on this subject? And how can we actually find the real insights from the comments instead of just the trolling and the hate and the terrible speech and the stupid first, which we see on most comments now, and really reinvented comments. At this time I had moved to the Valley, I should point out, when I was working on launching this. And I met everyone, I went out to all the mixers, I went to the investment clubs, I went to the software development forum, I went out to the Commonwealth Club, which is like a big city group, and I networked and networked and networked, and I met everyone, and I made good friends, and it was, finally, I'm going to get money on this one. And basically every one of them, without fail, said, where is their money in comments? Basically at this time, SaaS wasn't a reality yet. Intense debate, live fire, discuss, none of those existed yet. And essentially all my friends who were investors are like, Chris, you're not going to make any money on this. We're not going to be able to invest in you. Right again, wrong time. If I had done it a year later, there would have been competitors, and it would have shown the proof of the market, and it would have made it very easy to actually raise money, as it were. But again, the story on this was very difficult because I needed to actually show it. People couldn't imagine what I was speaking about because they'd never seen it yet. And what I would have done differently is I would have made the logo, I would have actually built some low fidelity prototypes just to be able to mock it up to show what it was that I was talking about, so somebody could see it and play with it more like a sculpture instead of a speech. And once they could see it, maybe then they could see what it was that we were doing and make the lead. And I've done that last time very successfully. You have to be able to show, not just tell. Anything else of insights? There's probably a lot more, but actually there's a really big silver lining, because as I was going out to talk about insights, it was the beginning of the social media era. What?
I do have one more.
Okay.
That it's an idea that time still has yet to come.
Oh, yeah.
Carry it.
That's actually very good, yes.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Sometimes it's good to have your wife with you, what do you know? Sometimes. No, that's very true, because there's a lot of things that, maybe you worked on something 2 years ago and the time wasn't right. And here with Insights in particular, it's still in the back of my mind because no one's ever done it quite the way that I've looked at it. And in fact, I was talking the other day with the CEO of a very large company who's very interested in it and wanted to apply some of the pieces of it to their software. So I'm actually going to be doing a little piece of it with a consulting gig starting next month. And that's 12 years ago. So sometimes it's just not the right time. And I know a lot of places in big companies and elsewhere, if they try something and it fails, then they just think it's no good and they throw it away. But the reality is that timing really is everything. And if you get it at the right time, at the right moment, it could be something spectacular. So an old idea like this that I didn't even build a logo for might still be a business in a year or two from now. I don't know. We'll wait and we'll see how it comes and who I meet and what they have an interest in and share that story again. So always keep those big ideas in the back of your head so that you can be able to share them on demand when an opportunity presents itself. But that led to Social Media Club, because as I was running around doing this, I saw this big rise of bar camps and unconferences, and looking at the co-working space that just started. We actually had started one of the first co-working spaces in San Francisco, of which we set it up for Social Media Club's office. I'm showing you here a little bit of the later on success. This is from the 5-year anniversary. Social Media Club was a global nonprofit organization that actually reached ultimately over 350 cities around the world, including Africa, all over Asia and Australia. In fact, one time I was flying back from Fort Lauderdale, and MC Hammer was sitting next to me on the plane, and he recognized me from being around the valley because we were at parties or whatever. And he's like, "Chris, I just spoke at your Social Media Club in Sydney, Australia. It was awesome. There's 3,000 people there. It was held in a nightclub." And I'm like, I've never seen one of my events with more than 200 people. So it can grow beyond your wildest dreams sometimes. And it was a great success, and it's why I'm here now, because I saw the power of people coming together to help each other. And our mantra, our tagline, if you can see in a couple of places, is if you get it, share it. And this is perhaps one of the most poignant lessons for whatever your business might be. There's actually a new book out that talks about this idea, this model, that I just saw the other day. It's called The Membership Economy. The Membership Economy. And what it is it's about the sense of belonging that we all have. It's actually about this idea of a tribe. It's more than just being a customer. It's more than just being loyal to the brand. It's a sense of belonging that we all crave for inside as human beings. And by being able to provide that for people, it creates a deeper form of loyalty and friendship and business relationship that you can't have in a normal transactional business. But the values at the heart of this was sharing. And everywhere we went around the world were a number of wonderful people who wanted to help, who wanted to share what they learned, who wanted to share everything they had with each other to make us all better. And it was that brought us together. And in many ways, it wasn't religious as in sort of the cult, but it was religious around the idea that we have the same morals, the same principles inside of us to help each other. And it was that bound us together wherever we went. And we had, all the big authors from social media and business and everything else literally traveling around the world to visit and speak at different social media club chapters. And they felt like they were home every time they met somewhere new. And it was just a remarkable feeling. And that's a lesson from success, most certainly. The one part of the failure from this, which was also the key to the success, was that we let it go. You can see all the different logos here from Detroit and Mexico and Chennai and Chicago and Pakistan and Mongolia. I mean, it grew everywhere around the world. And every place did their own logo. They took the spirit of the logo and interpreted it for their own city and country. And by making it their own, again, just like with the co-working spaces I was talking about before, they were able to join up in the larger thing. But we didn't put a lot of structure on it because, well, I had blown all my money trying to build insights and get funded. And so once again, I was broke and looking at what can I do to, get out there and do this. And I figured, maybe this blogging thing has some legs. And if I know all the best bloggers in the world, maybe that will turn into something for me. So getting to know people and expanding a global network is not a bad way to invest your time and energy. But what we did that was really wrong out of this was actually we did it as a nonprofit. And there was a moment actually where the person I brought in to help run operations and I had a debate about whether or not we could become a for-profit. And essentially he said to me that, Chris, you promised. And I said, you know what, you're right. I did promise. I promised we would do it as a nonprofit. So we're going to do that. And I'm not one to want to break promises, but I really wish I did. Because there was no money in this. There was really, the central organization was myself and my wife. We ultimately had 1 year where we had hired a community manager, or about 1.5 years who worked with us, because we had sold a very big sponsorship to General Motors, and was able to use that money to pay her. But I would have done it as a for-profit business, and adhered to the social values. In the US, we now have a for-benefit corporation, which can make profit, but promises for social impact behind it. And the reason why I wish we did that is because then we would have had resources, we would have had incentive, we would have had structures to pay people who were participating, and we didn't. And it's not just about the shared values, it's about the shared value, that everyone gets something out of it. And what we found was that many of the people who had helped stand it up globally originally ended up doing their own thing, in essence competing with the very concept that we had taken, not out of malice, out of need. They needed to make money. As you remember, or as you may remember, everyone thought social media was free. So it was very hard to make money as a social media consultant or speaker or what have you. So there's no begrudging them on that. It's just a matter of how the market was once again. So now I'm going to move forward to my most recent things. I went to work at Deloitte after Social Media Club to help pay off the debt that we took on to build the nonprofit. And was very fortunate as I moved up that John Hagel was a brilliant man. He wrote a book called Net Worth, and Net Gain was another one, talking about network effects and how networks at scale help businesses grow. And I was a fanboy, and I became friends with him. And he was working at Deloitte, and he helped me get the job there. And from there, I spent 2.5 years almost inside of Deloitte, working with the biggest brands and companies in the world, because I wanted to see firsthand how they were adapting to social media, how they were adapting to this connected society with a transparent market where they couldn't cheat people and get away with it at scale anymore, and how are they changing their operations. Because as an agency, as a digital design shop, as a social media agency, which I also had at one point in there as well, we couldn't influence how they were offering their product. We couldn't influence the product design. We couldn't influence the decisions about how to treat their customers. They only wanted to hire us to help get the word out and amplify their message, and they didn't want to hear anything else from us. So I wanted to be on the consulting side to learn more. And from the experience inside Deloitte, rolling out Yammer globally to 180,000 people, enterprise social network Yammer, which you probably don't even hear of anymore because they're kind of not around. Microsoft bought them. I found out what the biggest problem in the biggest companies in the world was. People don't always do what they say they're going to do. Let me say that again because it's so obvious, it sounds stupid. People don't always do what they say they're going to do. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about the Germans, because they always do what they say they're going to do, and they're very precise about what it is before they do it. And in fact, talking to my German analyst friends at the largest analyst companies, they explain this to me very clearly. Chris, you Americans, you commit to everything and you do nothing. Germans, we commit to nothing, but we do everything. And I'm like, oh, shit, that's why. Now all of a sudden all my interactions with German friends made total sense why they really didn't get along with us Americans. But anyways, so I'm looking at it, I'm like, why does that happen? And of course the first thing you want to think is like, oh, there's just assholes inside some companies. And that's the way they're going to behave. How did that go off? There's just some assholes inside of some companies, and that's just the way it's going to work. But when you really drill down to it, and we did the research over a long time, almost a full year and more to get this down, it's really actually more about a lack of clarity. I didn't understand what it was you wanted. It's a lack of visibility into what I actually had capacity to do for someone else. It's actually a lack of mutual respect. Sometimes the boss doesn't respect the worker doing the work. Sometimes the worker doesn't respect the boss. And many times they don't respect each other, which is unfortunate. And a big part of it, in another book that I would recommend to you, a book called Built on Trust. I think there's actually, I don't know if it's in Hungarian, but it is in German, Italian, French, but Built on Trust. One of the central principles I learned from this book many years before was that if you continuously don't deliver on what you promise, then people will come to expect that from you. People will come to expect that you will not do what you say you're going to do, and therefore they won't come to you to ask you to do things, and you lose trust. And by losing that trust, you lose your ability to get work done. So we built a line. I know many people say a lind. You'd be right to say that. It was about 55-60% say a lind. I kept saying, no, we've got to get a line. And I didn't have enough money to spend to solve that problem. Another thing, when you're picking your naming, if you can pick an easier name, that would be much easier to do, to get forward. But this time I built the thing first. I mean, I talked to some friends about trying to get some money. I figured, hey, I'm now inside the valley. I know all the best VCs. I know, in fact, one of the greatest experience I had, I pitched Ann Winblad from Hummer Winblad. Ann is just one of the brightest women I've ever met, right up there with Esther Dyson and just so many others. And she's like, Chris, I can't invest in you, but get through this seed round and come back. Which is great, because she actually meant it, whereas most of them will say that just because they don't want to talk to you and shuttle you off, which is very disappointing, but that's how it works. And I never got to have that other conversation. But what I didn't do right in building it out first, and I built the whole thing, I can actually demo it for you, it's still up and running, but there's no one using it right now, is I failed to recognize human psychology. I believed that we could make a case for why people could take one extra step in collaborating with one another to get clear about the work that we were doing together, and that they would see the benefit in being accountable to each other. And what I found was that no one wants to be accountable. And I'll give you a very simple example of what I mean, and this isn't necessarily no one, because it's also cultural, globally it's different. Again, Germans have a different perspective, Asians have a different perspective, obviously the Americans have a different perspective, so maybe I started in the wrong market too, and I should have been maybe in Germany or somewhere else, so that's possibly another lesson. Oh, I lost my lesson. What was my lesson in there? Okay, okay. So what I ended up doing was I built the whole thing, and I kept finding, wait, it needs that one more feature. So every time I went out and I got a pilot going and I showed it to them, I'd say, yeah, and next we're going to build. And then I'd have to go build it because people wouldn't use it until I actually got it built. And by the time I got it built and raised the money out of, we took out our retirement savings, we took out loans from our parents, we sold whatever we could. I sold some baseball cards and, literally whatever we could to do it. And I kept consulting. And I'm like, okay, we're going to build the next thing. So if you're building the product, sell what you have, not what you're going to build. Very important and simple lesson, but so important. Sell what you've built, not what you're going to build. Because they will always wait until that comes next. And you don't know when that could be. And so I really shot myself in the foot on that one. There's a few others there that we can talk about later, but we're running on time and I don't want to keep going on it. But we can come back to that, and I'm happy to show it to you later as well. But what I ended up doing was pivoting. And we had an idea early on in one of our feedback sessions with a very smart group of people. That's like, we have a group that works together, and we wouldn't use the system in that way. Could I just ask, will someone in my group do this for me? Because anyone in our little agency group could do the work. It's just a matter of who was available and whether or not they had the interest to actually do it. So I'm like, great, will someone? And we registered willsomeone.com and asked someone and does someone and a whole bunch of other common English phrases that we thought might be clever. And then I set about building that on the pivot as well, and trying to raise money throughout as well. We can talk separately about fundraising process. This wasn't going to be too deep on that. But it was really a great product. I actually looked back at my experience building Social Media Club and working with other co-working spaces and realized it was perfect for that. But by then it was too late. I had already kind of run out of money, I had kind of run out of runway. And now I was at a point where I couldn't build those next features that people were waiting for. And essentially around, October? Around October, November, well, I came over for Web Summit in November, I guess, early November, and I was still trying to raise money for it. I was still showing it off and trying to get people to use it, and it just didn't have the right features. And I just couldn't get them built to make it work the way that we wanted to, and I couldn't let go of it. I still believe in it so much that even though it doesn't do anything, we're paying, what, about $350 a month? We're paying around $350 US a month for hosting fees to keep aligned and will someone rolling, just in the event I might be able to show it to somebody. So, that's like 3,000 US that we've just kind of, burning that we've burnt so far in the past 6 to 8 months, just on the hope that one day I might find the right person. Now that said, I did. So that's not a lesson in failure, that's a lesson of success. That if you actually believe in what you're doing strongly enough, find the way. Now, I cut it back. It was over $1,500 a month is what I was paying. So I cut off the SSL, I cut off the endpoint off of Heroku, I downgraded the database services, I cut back all the cloud services I could to the lowest possible level so that I could maintain it as long as I possibly could, in the hope that it would get in front of somebody and change things. And they're not signed, and I do say get the signature paperwork up front before you do it, but it's potentially a couple of contracts that are worth $20,000 to $30,000 just next month. So it ended up being worthwhile for me and not a failure, as it were. But by believing in yourself enough and finding a way, it can pay off. And so you just have to know which times to believe in self and which times you can't. But when we got to the beginning of the year, I had just gone through a surgery. And that was quite difficult. I had this hand thing where turns out I broke my wrist about 5 years ago, and they missed it. So they had to remove half of my wrist. So that's kind of a bummer, right? And I can't do push-ups, whatever else. I'm actually starting to bench press now. So it's come back. I've done the rehab and we're doing better. But it still works and I can type and all that, right? So it's okay. But it was depressing. I was literally, my business failed. We're $500,000 in that we invested into the company. It didn't work. 100 and something thousand US in debt again. And, wow, my wrist is bad. Business failed. Shit, what do I do? And because I believed in the idea so much, I couldn't let go. I kept trying, but I wasn't really trying because I was depressed. And I've spoken publicly about being depressed before. In fact, one of my friends encouraged me to do it, to go ahead and help others to believe that it's okay, because it's something, if you believe in something, things are hard, it gets difficult, we get sad. And it's a human response. It's not, we're not, statues, or we're not perfect beings. Everyone has different challenges that they face in life, and we have to go through them. So I didn't go get help. I just kind of sat around depressed for several months. And eventually, in about April, I finally said, I've had enough of this. I've got to go and get help. And I went out and I found a psychologist finally, and I started talking about it. And in about a month, I had some big breakthroughs. And in about a month and a half, I was out saying, okay, we're going to get out and do this again. And we're going to go look for a job. And I'm going to write a blog post. And I'm going to update my LinkedIn profile. And we're going to go out and we're going to tell people I need to go find a job. I didn't talk about the depression too much. I made the focus on, here's all the stuff that I do. Here's what I'm good at. Here's what I want to do. And that was the majority of the conversation. And most of the depression conversations at the time, I had personally, one-to-one with people, particularly with other friends who were struggling, other entrepreneurs who were struggling as well. And we supported one another through this. So finding somebody to talk to, whether it's a professional, a family member, a friend, is very important. Being an entrepreneur is very, very hard work. Particularly, as you can imagine, 22 years of it, having a company, an idea taken away for $4 billion US, failing a bunch of them, succeeding a bunch of them, and really, putting yourself out there. But having that belief that you can do anything. And more importantly, as I looked back during that time after I went to the psychologist, is when I realized that I'm a futurist. And if you look at my LinkedIn profile at some point, you'll see, I've shared 6 or so of the companies that I started that were many years ahead of their time, but there's really like a dozen or more. And there's probably another dozen that I didn't even try to do anything with because I didn't have time. So I know I will always find the next thing. And I still have that belief in myself, even though I wasn't feeling great about it. And I still believe, in fact, I was here the other night when Tony from Meta was here, and he's doing that new kind of co-working accelerator sort of thing he's working on. And he just said, oh, what's Will Someone? Because that's the card I gave him. And I pitched him on it really quick. He goes, oh, that sounds interesting. I'll check it out. And so he signed up for it. I don't know if he's going to use it or not, but you never know where that's going to come. And so you just have to really find that way to dig down inside and pull yourself up. Because one of the biggest lessons I've learned from all my failures over the years is that you can choose what it means. Whatever happens to us, you can choose that it means I'm a loser, I'm a failure, I'm never going to be able to make a success as an entrepreneur, I need to go to work at a regular job and punch the clock and sit in the cubicle and do this stuff to get a paycheck to provide for our family. Or you can go, no, I'm going to find a way to make enough money to pay it all off so that in 2 or 3 years I can do it again. And that's the choice that I made. And that's the meaning that I took from it. That it was another way for me to move forward. And that the next opportunity will be even bigger. And that's kind of where I've landed. And the stuff that's now in front of me, 3 months after starting to go into a psychologist and starting to work on this and getting out and talking to people again, I've got a much bigger opportunity that'll pay this all off in a year or so. And I don't even know what's going to come from it. I just have to be very happy that I'm there. So a little bit of the wisdom. I was trying to share a couple of builds and I couldn't build it in time. But the first thing really is be helpful. One of our dear friends who is the head of social at Rackspace, and more than that now, I think he's VP Comms or something, that's his entire social media strategy. But it's the same reason why I'm here. I don't know if I can help you or not, or my stories make a difference to you, but I try to be helpful wherever I go. And from this I found that karma works. I've slept on couches all around the world. I've been brought to dinner when I haven't had money to eat, and I've had jobs brought to me when I didn't have work to do. And karma works. It just doesn't pay on demand. It pays when it's ready for you to receive. Be vulnerable. Not everyone can stand up and share some of the personal stories that I have. That's okay. Be who you are. But when you find those moments and you're willing to be vulnerable is when people can see who you really are. And they can know where you come from, so that they can have a chance to connect with who you are, and know who you are, and find that courage to step forward into being all that you can be. I guess you were laughing at the be you unless you're an asshole. That's very important. If you're an asshole, please mask it, because no one likes assholes. I do have a no asshole rule. I now apply that to every business relationship. If somebody's willing to pay me a lot of money, I don't want it if they're an asshole. We don't have time for it. There's too many great people out there in the world we can find to work with. We need to be kind and generous and support one another, not stab each other in the back, lie, and manipulate. Share your stories, give away as much as you can, but get it in writing. As we were moving out in the fall, wrapping up, I didn't realize it at the time, but as I was wrapping up with someone, I started working on a new nonprofit, and it was called Rising Tide. And the idea was the rising tide that lifts all boats. It's an old American proverb, if you will, or saying. And maybe it's even more broadly than that. And then I started looking at it and I'm like, wait. I know it worked last time, that I was able to build a global nonprofit. I think I better get my life in order this time at 46 before I actually go off and do it. So we didn't push the nonprofit forward as much as possible. But what we found was a universal challenge that everyone had. You have to know who you are in order to know what you want. You have to look inside yourself. You have to decide what really matters to you, right? And beyond that, once you actually know what it is you want, you have to actually be able to recognize it, once you know what it is you want, that's when you will recognize it when you see it. This is another old phrase, so I stole that, right? Just to be clear. Try not to accredit people. But it's a really significant thing. I had a friend of mine actually tell me that he was looking for a job. And he had this great idea and he wanted to do this thing and blah, 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 but I got to get a job in that space. I'm like, why do you need a job? What if you met somebody who was, going to be working on that? What would you start a company with them? Oh yeah, I'd do that. I'm like, so then what you don't want is a job. What you want to do is you want to work on this idea. You want to move this thing forward. You want to invest your time developing your knowledge and experience around this space. And you want to find other people who are doing it too, to be cohorts to help you move it forward. And that way, whether it's a job or a new company or whatever it might be, then when it comes to you at a networking event, you can seize it, you can make it happen. But if you're only looking for a job, if you have a business startup opportunity that comes to you, you're going to totally say, oh no, I need a job. I can't do it. So you have to be very clear with your language and your intention about what it is that you want. And then ultimately, you need to really imagine and internalize what success is going to make you feel. How are you going to feel when you achieve it? Because when you're staying up for your third night in a row, if you can't connect to that deeper purpose of why you're doing it, not only are you not going to be able to stay awake, but the quality of that work is going to reflect that. By being connected to your purpose, by being focused on driving forward towards those goals, to those objectives in your life that you have, that's where you're going to find your true success. And that's where I hope you each are able to go and find your success today. Thank you very much for your time.